Billionaire CEO was asked by poor twins to trade their shoes for bread. Their secret shattered him. Have you ever walked past someone who needed help and pretended not to see them? Have you ever been so focused on your next big win that you missed the most important moment of your life, happening right in front of you? Hi viewers, kindly, tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The morning rain transformed Manhattan into a battleground of honking horns and screeching brakes. Alexander Nathaniel Blackwood III stepped out of his Bentley onto the slick pavement, abandoning a ride that cost more than most people's annual salary. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the wet concrete as he made a decision that would cost him $50 billion. Alexander was 6 blocks away from the most crucial meeting in his career. Yamamoto International waited in their glass tower, ready to discuss a deal that would triple his $12 billion empire. His phone buzzed with frantic messages from his assistant. Stock prices, meeting schedules, corporate destiny calling. Then he saw them. 2 small figures pressed against a closed coffee shop, their bright winter caps creating the only color in the gray morning chaos. Pink and yellow, like tiny flowers growing through concrete cracks. The girls couldn't have been older than 6. Identical twins with piercing blue eyes that seemed far too wise for their age. The smaller one, the girl in the pink cap, stepped forward with a confidence that stopped Alexander cold. "Excuse me, mister." Her voice cut through the city noise, clear and unwavering. "Would you trade your shoes for our shoes? My sister Luna is really hungry, and we heard that sometimes people trade things for food." Alexander's world tilted. Around him, hundreds of people rushed past, executives, tourists, delivery workers, all too busy to notice 2 children offering their most precious possessions for a chance to eat. The girl in the yellow cap, Luna, nodded solemnly, clutching a pair of small sneakers against her chest, like they contained her entire world. "We do our best, shoes," Luna whispered. "Mama gave them to us, before—" Her words faded, but her meaning struck Alexander like lightning. What would you sacrifice everything for? What moment would make you forget about billions of dollars and remember what it means to be human? Alexander crouched down to their level, his expensive suit soaking up rainwater from the sidewalk. "What are your names?" "I'm Stella," said the girl in pink, positioning herself protectively in front of her sister. "This is Luna. We take care of each other now." The simplicity of those words, "we take care of each other now," carried more weight than any corporate contract Alexander had ever signed. Here were 2 children, abandoned by the world, whose first instinct was to protect and provide for each other. His phone screamed with another call. Yamamoto International, $50 billion waiting. The biggest deal of his life, slipping away with every second he spent on this wet sidewalk. Alexander powered off his phone. "Listen," he said, looking directly into their incredible blue eyes. "I know a place nearby that serves the best hot chocolate and sandwiches in the city. Would you like to come with me?" The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that only siblings share, weighing trust against survival, hope against the harsh lessons they'd already learned about adults who make promises. "We don't take charity," Stella announced with dignity that would make royalty proud. "We trade fair." Alexander smiled for the first time in weeks. "All right then. I'll trade you a meal for the story of how you got those beautiful shoes. Stay with me to discover how one moment can change 3 lives forever, and why the most successful businessman in New York was about to make the most expensive and most important trade of his life." The diner's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket as Alexander watched the twins eat with the careful precision of children who'd learned not to waste food. Every few minutes, Stella would push half her sandwich toward Luna, who would mirror the gesture. A wordless dance of sacrifice that spoke louder than any corporate mission statement Alexander had ever written. Have you ever met someone whose story connected to yours in ways you never expected? Have you ever discovered that a stranger's tragedy was partially your fault? "Stella," Alexander said carefully. "What was your mother's full name?" "Isabel Maria Rodriguez," Stella replied between deliberate bites. "She worked at St. Mary's Hospital. She always smelled like soap and those mint candies she kept in her pocket for the sick children." Alexander's blood turned to ice. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through photos until he found it. A charity gala from 3 years ago. There, in the background of a picture showing his $2 million donation ceremony, stood a woman with flowing dark hair and the same piercing blue eyes as the twins. Isabel Rodriguez, The nurse who'd sent him a handwritten thank you note after his donation to the pediatric wing. The same nurse who'd called his office 18 months later, desperate and crying, begging for any job available because her husband had been laid off, and they couldn't afford their daughter's medical bills. His assistant had declined politely and hung up. Alexander had never even known about the call. "Girls," he managed, his voice barely steady. "Where is your father now?" Stella's jaw tightened with heartbreaking maturity. "Daddy left us 3 days ago at that coffee shop. He said he'd come back for us. But adults say lots of things they don't mean." She shrugged, with acceptance that no 6-year-old should possess. "We're okay, though. We have each other, and we're smart." He started acting strange after Mama died, Luna added quietly. He would disappear for days and come home smelling like those places where people yell and throw things. Alexander's empire was crumbling 6 blocks away. His assistant was probably having a breakdown. Yamamoto International was likely moving on to his competitors. But none of that mattered anymore. "Listen very carefully," he told the twins. "I knew your mother. She was one of the kindest people I ever met, and she loved you both. More than anything in the world." The girl's eyes widened in perfect synchronization. 3 years ago, your mama helped take care of sick children at the hospital where she worked. She made every child feel special and loved, even when they were scared. Alexander paused, struggling with how much truth to share. "She tried to call me once when your family needed help. I wish I had been there to help her then." Luna crawled closer to him across the diner booth. "Are you an angel? Mama said angels sometimes come disguised as regular people to help when things get really bad." Before Alexander could answer, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Blackwood? This is Detective Maria Santos with NYPD. We understand you've been asking about Marcus Rodriguez?" Alexander stepped away from the table, his heart hammering. "Yes, why?" "Sir, we've been searching for those children for 2 days. Rodriguez was found dead this morning in Atlantic City, apparent suicide. He left a note mentioning twin daughters, but no information about their location. Child Services has been turning the city upside down looking for them." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He looked back at Stella and Luna, who were now making paper napkin flowers while they waited for him to return. "Detective, I have them. They're safe. Mr. Blackwood, I need you to stay exactly where you are. We're sending a unit and Child Services will—" "Wait," Alexander interrupted. "These children have been through enough trauma for one lifetime. Can we handle this with some sensitivity? I'd like to explore alternative arrangements." There was a long pause. "Sir, are you saying you want to adopt them?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Alexander thought he knew about himself. He was a man who collected companies, not children. A man who understood profit margins, not bedtime stories. A man who'd never changed a diaper, or attended a school play, or worried about anyone but himself. "I'm saying I want to make sure they're protected and loved," he replied, watching Stella teach Luna how to fold napkins into roses. "Whatever that takes." Like and share if you believe some things are more valuable than money, and stay tuned to discover why Alexander's decision was about to get much more complicated than he ever imagined. 2 hours later, Alexander's penthouse overlooking Central Park had been transformed into something resembling a war room. While Stella and Luna napped on his massive leather sofa, looking impossibly small against the expensive furniture, he coordinated with his security team to uncover the truth about Marcus Rodriguez. The facts painted a devastating picture. Marcus had accumulated gambling debts totaling over $200,000 with some of New York's most dangerous loan sharks. After Isabel's death, he'd sold everything of value, her jewelry, the family car, even the twins' college funds, trying to stay ahead of threats against his daughters. "Mr. Blackwood," his head of security reported grimly. "Rodriguez was getting death threats daily. These people don't care about collateral damage. They were planning to hurt the children to send him a message." Alexander felt sick. Marcus hadn't abandoned his daughters out of cruelty. He'd left them to save their lives, choosing to disappear rather than watch them become victims of his mistakes. His phone rang again. "Detective Santos, Mr. Blackwood, we have a problem. Child Services is demanding immediate custody of the children. There's a social worker en route to your location right now and she has a history with you." "What do you mean?" "Victoria Chen. She specifically requested this case when she heard your name was involved." Alexander's world stopped. Victoria Chen, his ex-fiancée, the woman who'd left him 2 years ago because she claimed he cared more about profit than people. The woman who'd thrown her engagement ring at him during their final fight, screaming that he was incapable of loving anything that couldn't be bought or sold. The same woman who now worked as a social worker specializing in children's advocacy. 20 minutes later, his doorman announced Victoria's arrival. She stood in his hallway wearing jeans and a sweater, her long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the polished socialite she'd been when they were together. "Really, Alex?" she said without preamble. "You think you can just collect traumatized children like you collect companies?" "Victoria, this isn't what you think. I'm the social worker assigned to this case," she interrupted, pushing past him into the apartment. "And I'm telling you right now, your money can't buy you instant parenthood. These children need stability, not a billionaire's guilt project." Alexander felt his temper flare, but before he could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Excuse me." Stella appeared in the hallway, still holding Luna's hand, both girls wearing the new pajamas Alexander had hastily purchased. "Are you here to take us to another place? Because if you are, we'd like to know now so we can prepare. We're good at preparing." Victoria's expression softened instantly. She knelt down to the twins' level, her professional training overriding personal feelings. "Hi there. I'm Victoria, and I'm here to make sure you're safe and happy. That's my job, to protect children and help them find the best families." "Mr. Alexander is protecting us too," Luna said quietly. "He traded us food for our story and he says he knew our mama. He keeps his promises." Victoria looked up sharply at Alexander, a question in her eyes that he wasn't ready to answer. Not here. Not in front of the girls who'd already lost too much. "Victoria," he said quietly, "can we talk privately for a moment?" After settling the twins back on the sofa with hot chocolate and a movie, Victoria followed Alexander to his study. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 2 years of unspoken words and unresolved hurt. "Tell me about their mother," she said finally. Alexander showed her the photo from the charity gala, then pulled up the files his assistant had compiled about Isabel Rodriguez. Her work history, medical records, the desperate phone call that had been dismissed without reaching him. "She called my office 18 months ago, he admitted. Her husband had lost his job and she was working double shifts to pay for the twins' medical expenses. Luna had pneumonia, Stella had broken her arm. Isabel was asking if there were any positions available at any of my companies." Victoria's expression was unreadable. "And?" "My assistant turned her down without consulting me. I never even knew about the call until today." Alexander's voice was heavy with regret. "If I had known, I could have helped. I could have saved her." "You can't save everyone, Alex," Victoria said, but her tone had lost some of its earlier sharpness. "And you can't parent out of guilt." "This isn't about guilt," Alexander insisted, though even as he spoke, he wondered if it was entirely true. "Those girls offered to trade their only possessions, shoes their dying mother gave them, to feed each other. They've been taking care of themselves on the street for 3 days, and they're 6 years old. They're not looking for a savior, Victoria. They're looking for someone who won't abandon them like everyone else has." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the lamplight. "What about your company? Your 12-hour days, your business trips to 3 different continents every month? What happens when the novelty wears off and they need you to show up for school plays and doctor appointments and nightmares at 2 in the morning?" "Then I'll be there," Alexander said simply. "I'll figure out the rest." From the living room came the sound of quiet giggling. Through the doorway, they could see Stella and Luna had fallen asleep, curled together on the sofa, the movie still playing softly on the enormous television. "They're going to need more than good intentions," Victoria warned. "These children have been traumatized. They'll need therapy, patience, and more love than you've probably ever given anyone." "I know," Alexander said quietly. "But they're worth learning for." Victoria stood to leave but paused at the door. "Alex, there's something else you need to know. The suicide in Atlantic City. Detective Santos is having it reinvestigated. Something about the timing doesn't add up. Marcus Rodriguez might not be as dead as everyone thinks." The next morning brought chaos that Alexander's money couldn't solve. Luna woke up screaming from a nightmare about their father returning to take them away. By the time Alexander managed to calm her down, Stella had locked herself in the bathroom and refused to come out. "Stella," he called through the door, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt. because he'd spent the night on the floor beside Luna's makeshift bed. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" "You're going to get tired of us," came the muffled reply. "Everyone gets tired of us eventually." Alexander slid down to sit with his back against the bathroom door, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. Running a $12 billion empire suddenly seemed simple compared to this. "What makes you think that? You've been on your phone all morning. You had important people calling and getting mad at you. We heard them yelling through the speaker." Stella's voice was small but determined. "We know we're making your life complicated. Adults don't usually want complicated." It was true. Alexander's assistant had called 6 times before 8 a.m. The board of directors was demanding an emergency meeting. 3 major investors had threatened to pull out after news of the failed Yamamoto deal hit the financial networks. His stock price had dropped another 8% overnight. "Stella, can you unlock the door? I want to show you something." After several minutes, the lock clicked. Stella emerged with red-rimmed eyes, looking impossibly young and vulnerable. Alexander led both twins to his home office and sat them down at his massive mahogany desk. "See this?" He pointed to a framed photograph, him with his father when Alexander was about the twins' age. "My daddy used to work all the time, too. He missed my school plays and baseball games because he thought providing money was the same as providing love." The twins listened with the intensity of children who'd learned that adult words often determined their fate. "I promised myself I would never do that if I had children of my own, but old habits are hard to break, and I'm still learning." Alexander looked directly at each girl. "So, I'm going to make some changes, and I need your help to make sure I keep my promises." "Our help?" Luna asked, her nightmare temporarily forgotten. "Yes. If you ever feel like I'm working too much, or not paying enough attention to you, I want you to tell me immediately. Can you do that?" Stella studied his face with the seriousness of a judge. "And you promise you won't get mad at us for interrupting important business?" "I promise. In fact, let's make it official." Alexander pulled out a piece of company letterhead and began writing. "Every day, each of you gets to pick one thing we do together. It can be anything: reading stories, playing games, going to the park, or even helping me with work if you want to learn about business." For the first time since their nightmare, Stella smiled. But their moment of peace was shattered by Alexander's doorman calling through the intercom. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Chen is here again. She says it's urgent, and she's not leaving until she speaks with you." Victoria stood in the hallway holding a thick manila folder, her expression grim. "We need to talk," she said. "All of us, including the girls." 20 minutes later, they sat around Alexander's dining room table, like an unlikely family meeting. Stella and Luna shared a chair, still wearing their pajamas, while Victoria spread official documents across the polished wood. "I've been doing some investigating of my own," Victoria began. "And I've discovered some things that change everything about this situation." She pulled out a series of photographs, surveillance images from ATMs, gas stations, and convenience stores. "Marcus Rodriguez has been alive and using his credit cards for the past week. Atlantic City, Philadelphia, now somewhere in New Jersey. The body they found wasn't him." Alexander felt the room tilt. "Then who?" "A homeless man with similar height and build. Someone planted Marcus's wallet on the body." Victoria's voice was deadly serious. "Alex, someone is playing a very dangerous game here, and these children are the targets." Stella's small hand found Luna's. "Is our daddy coming back?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Victoria said gently. "But if he does, we're going to make sure you're protected." Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice kids. Would hate to see them get hurt because of their new daddy's poor business decisions. Some debts can't be bought off." The message was accompanied by a photo taken through his apartment window. Stella and Luna asleep on his sofa the night before. Someone knew exactly where they were, and Marcus Rodriguez was alive, which meant everything they thought they knew about this situation was wrong. Comment below, what would you do if protecting the people you love meant putting them in even greater danger? 3 weeks had passed since the twins moved into Alexander's carefully ordered life, and every day brought new challenges that no amount of money could solve. His penthouse had been transformed from a showcase of wealth into something resembling an actual home. Children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator, toys scattered across expensive rugs, and the constant sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for years. But success wasn't measured in stock prices anymore. It was measured in Luna's willingness to eat breakfast without coaxing, in Stella's first genuine laugh during their nightly story time, and in the way both girls had stopped flinching every time his phone rang. Alexander had restructured his entire business model around fatherhood. Morning meetings were rescheduled to accommodate school drop-offs. International calls happened during nap time. His executive assistant had become an expert in managing both corporate crises and pediatric emergencies with equal efficiency. The board of directors was not pleased. "Alexander, this company has shareholders who expect results, not excuses," his uncle Richard had said during their latest confrontation. "Your personal life cannot continue to interfere with business operations." Richard Blackwood was everything Alexander had once aspired to be. Ruthlessly successful, completely focused, and entirely unencumbered by emotional attachments. At 58, he controlled the second-largest stake in Blackwood Industries and had been positioning himself as Alexander's successor for years. "The Yamamoto deal was worth $50 billion, Richard continued, pacing Alexander's office like a predator. "You walked away from it to play house with two random children. The board is asking serious questions about your judgment." "Those children aren't random," Alexander replied calmly, not looking up from the financial reports spread across his desk. "They're my daughters now." "Your what?" Richard stopped pacing. "Alex, you've known them for 3 weeks. You can't just decide to become a father because you feel guilty about some nurse who called looking for work." Alexander finally looked up, and Richard took a step back at the cold fury in his nephew's eyes. "Those girls have been through more trauma in 6 years than most adults face in a lifetime. They were abandoned, hungry, and afraid, and they still had enough grace to offer their most precious possessions to help each other. If you can't understand why that matters more than any business deal, then you don't understand what this company should really stand for." Richard's expression shifted to something calculating. "And what happens when Child Services decides you're not fit to be a parent? What happens when their biological father shows up and wants them back? You're setting yourself up for heartbreak, and you're taking the entire company down with you." Before Alexander could respond, his office door burst open. Stella and Luna rushed in, both talking at once in the rapid-fire way that children do when they're excited. "Daddy Alex, we learned about business math today," Stella announced, using the name they'd started calling him after the formal adoption papers had been filed. "And Miss Jennifer said we could bring you to school for career day," Luna added, bouncing on her toes with enthusiasm. Alexander's heart swelled, as it did every time they called him Daddy Alex. The girls had insisted on the combined title, formal enough to show respect, personal enough to show love. "That sounds wonderful," he said, pulling them into his arms for the kind of hug that had become as natural as breathing. "Did you have good days at school?" Richard watched this interaction with barely concealed disgust. To him, the display of affection was weakness. To Alexander, it had become the strongest part of his day. "Uncle Richard!" Stella suddenly noticed the older man standing stiffly by the window. "Are you here for a business meeting? We can be quiet if you need to talk about important things." "That's very considerate of you," Richard said, his tone carefully neutral. "But actually, I was just leaving." After he left, Alexander knelt down to the twins' level. "Girls, I want you to know that no matter what happens with the company or with any adults who might have opinions about our family, you will always be safe with me. Do you understand?" "We know," Luna said simply. "You keep your promises. That's why we picked you." "You picked me?" Stella nodded seriously. "That first day, when you asked what we wanted, we had a sister meeting while you were on the phone. We decided you were the right daddy for us, because you listened to our story, and you didn't try to fix us. You just wanted to take care of us." Alexander felt tears threatening, something that would have horrified him 6 months ago, but now seemed perfectly natural. "And we're going to take care of you too," Luna added. "That's what families do." As Alexander tucked the twins into bed that night, reading them the story they'd requested for the 15th time, he thought about Richard's warnings. The board was restless. Investors were concerned. His carefully built empire was showing cracks. But when Stella reached over to hold Luna's hand as they fell asleep, and when Luna whispered goodnight Daddy Alex in the darkness, Alexander knew he'd made the right choice. He had no idea that Richard was already setting a plan in motion that would force him to choose between the children he loved and the company he'd built. A plan that would bring Marcus Rodriguez back into their lives, whether they wanted him there or not. The real test was just beginning, and this time, Alexander's money and power might not be enough to protect the family he'd finally learned to love. Subscribe to see how this battle between blood and choice, between corporate power and parental love, will determine the fate of three people who found each other when they needed it most. Success has a way of breeding enemies, especially when that success threatens someone else's power. While Alexander was learning to braid Luna's hair and helping Stella with multiplication tables, his uncle Richard Blackwood was plotting his nephew's downfall from a corner office 3 floors below. Richard had built his entire identity around being Alexander's heir apparent. For 30 years he'd positioned himself as the logical successor to Blackwood Industries, carefully cultivating relationships with board members and major shareholders. Alexander's sudden transformation from predictable workaholic to devoted father figure threatened everything Richard had worked toward. The numbers told a damning story. Since the twins arrived, Alexander had declined 4 major acquisitions, postponed expansion into 3 international markets, and restructured executive compensation to prioritize work-life balance over profit margins. The Yamamoto deal alone had cost the company $18 billion in potential revenue. "He's lost his edge," Richard whispered to board member Catherine Mills during a private dinner. The Alexander we knew would never have walked away from the biggest deal in company history to play house with 2 random children. But Richard needed more than corporate gossip to remove his nephew. He needed scandal, public embarrassment, something so devastating that the board would have no choice but to act. The adoption proceedings gave him exactly the ammunition he required. Richard's private investigator, Frank Morrison, was a former police detective who specialized in finding people others preferred to stay hidden. When Morrison called with his preliminary findings, Richard felt the first rush of genuine excitement he'd experienced in months. "The father's alive," Morrison reported. "Marcus Rodriguez has been living in a Philadelphia shelter under the name Miguel Ramos, clean for 4 months, working construction, attending AA meetings twice a week." Richard's mind raced with possibilities. A grieving billionaire adopting orphan children made for sympathetic headlines. A wealthy man stealing children from their recovering father would destroy Alexander's reputation permanently. "What's his mental state?" Richard asked. "Fragile but determined. He calls child services daily asking about his daughters. The guilt is eating him alive." Perfect. Guilt-ridden fathers were easily manipulated, especially when someone offered them hope, wrapped in righteous indignation. Richard booked a flight to Philadelphia that afternoon. He found Marcus outside the AA meeting, a thin man with hollow eyes who looked decades older than his 38 years. The conversation was easier than Richard had anticipated. "Your daughters are living with one of the richest men in America," Richard began, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Alexander Blackwood has convinced the courts that you're dead, that he's their savior. He's using them as props to rebuild his public image after years of being called heartless." Marcus's hands shook as he processed this information. "They're safe, though? Happy? For now. But what happens when the publicity value wears off? When they become inconvenient?" Richard leaned forward. "These corporate types don't form genuine attachments. Everything is a transaction to them." The seed was planted. Within a week, Richard had provided Marcus with legal representation, a wardrobe suitable for court appearances, and a carefully rehearsed story about his recovery journey. The custody battle would destroy Alexander's credibility as a responsible guardian, while positioning Richard as the voice of corporate stability. Alexander was reviewing quarterly projections while Luna practiced violin when the doorman's call shattered their peaceful Tuesday evening. The words seemed to echo in slow motion. "Sir, there's a man here claiming to be the children's father." The violin music stopped abruptly. Luna's small face appeared in the doorway, bow still raised, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Stella emerged from her bedroom where she'd been working on a history report, immediately moving to stand beside her sister. "Girls, go to your room for a moment," Alexander said gently, but Stella shook her head. "If someone's here about us, we want to know," she said with that fierce protectiveness that never failed to amaze him. Marcus Rodriguez looked like a ghost materializing from their past. He was thinner than in the family photos Alexander had found, his clothes clean but cheap, his hands trembling slightly as he stepped into the apartment. Most striking were his eyes, the same piercing blue as his daughter's, but filled with shame and desperate hope. "I want my daughters back," Marcus said, his voice cracking on the last word. Luna made a small sound and stepped behind Alexander, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. Stella remained frozen, staring at the man who had promised to return and never did. "Daddy?" Stella's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm better now. I've been clean for 4 months. I have a job. I go to meetings every day. I want us to be a family again." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Alexander felt Luna's grip tighten on his shirt while Stella seemed to age years in seconds, her young face processing emotions no child should have to navigate. "You left us," Stella said finally. "We waited for 3 days. We were so hungry," Luna cried, "and I didn't know how to make it stop." Marcus's sob echoed through the apartment. "I know, sweetheart. I was sick in my head. But I'm getting help now. The doctors say I can be the daddy you deserve." "We have a daddy now," Luna whispered from behind Alexander. "He makes us pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and helps us with nightmares and never leaves us alone." Alexander's heart shattered and soared simultaneously. These children had chosen him, but he understood the complexity of their situation better than anyone. Biological bonds couldn't be dismissed, even when they came wrapped in abandonment and pain. Marcus looked at Alexander with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. "Thank you for taking care of them. But they're my daughters. The courts will understand that I was sick, that addiction is a disease. I have lawyers now, good ones who say I have rights." "What about their rights?" Alexander asked quietly. "The right to stability, to trust that the adults in their lives won't disappear when things get difficult?" Before Marcus could respond, Stella stepped forward with the composure of someone far older than her 8 years. "We want to talk to each other privately," she announced, taking Luna's hand. "All the grown-ups need to wait in the kitchen while we figure out what we think." Alexander watched them disappear into Stella's bedroom, marveling at their strength, even as his world tilted toward chaos. In the kitchen, he faced Marcus across the breakfast bar, where he'd helped the twins with countless homework assignments. "They look happy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "They are, most days." Alexander poured 2 cups of coffee with hands steadier than he felt. "They still have nightmares about being abandoned. Luna won't sleep alone when it storms. Stella hoards food in her dresser drawer because she's afraid of being hungry again." Marcus flinched at each word. "I can help them heal. I'm their father. Being a father isn't about biology, it's about showing up every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The bedroom door opened, and both girls emerged with identical expressions of solemn determination. "We've decided," Stella announced. "We want to stay with Alexander, but we want to know if you're really better, Daddy. Maybe we can have dinner sometimes and see if you keep your promises now." Victoria Chen had handled hundreds of custody cases, but none had kept her awake at night like this one. She sat in her car outside Alexander's building at 2 a.m., reviewing case files by streetlight and questioning every professional instinct she'd developed over 8 years in social work. The legal framework was clear. Biological parents possessed fundamental rights that required compelling evidence to terminate. Marcus Rodriguez had completed a rehabilitation program, maintained sobriety for 4 months, secured steady employment, and demonstrated genuine remorse for his past actions. By every standard metric, he deserved consideration for reunification with his daughters, but metrics couldn't capture the transformation she'd witnessed in Alexander's home. Victoria had conducted surprise visits at various times, early mornings, late evenings, weekends, expecting to find evidence of the neglect that often accompanied sudden lifestyle changes. Instead, she documented something unprecedented in her professional experience. Alexander had hired Dr. Sarah Kim, a child psychologist specializing in abandonment trauma, to work with the twins twice weekly. He'd enrolled them in martial arts classes to build confidence and swimming lessons because Luna had mentioned wanting to learn. Their bedrooms were thoughtfully decorated with input from each child, not generic designer perfection. More telling were the small details. Grocery lists written in 3 different handwritings as each family member contributed requests. A calendar on the refrigerator marking school events, doctor appointments, and family adventure days. Photos documenting everything from first days of school to cooking disasters in the kitchen. Victoria had interviewed the girls' teachers, who reported dramatic improvements in both academic performance and social interaction. Their pediatrician noted that both children had gained healthy weight and showed no signs of ongoing trauma health issues. The most damning evidence against Marcus came from the twins themselves. During her mandated individual interviews, both girls spoke about their biological father with compassion but not trust. "I love my daddy because he's my daddy," Stella had explained with heartbreaking maturity. "But I don't feel safe with him. Safe feels like knowing someone will be there when they say they will." Luna had been even more direct. "Daddy makes promises he can't keep. Alexander makes promises he keeps." Yet Victoria also recognized the complexity of the situation. Marcus's abandonment had occurred during an active addiction crisis following his wife's death. He'd been homeless, desperate, and facing threats from loan sharks. His decision, while devastating to his children, might have saved their lives. The rehabilitation program had been rigorous. 90 days inpatient treatment, ongoing therapy, regular drug testing, supervised housing, and mandatory employment. His counselors reported genuine progress, not just surface compliance. Victoria faced an impossible choice between legal precedent and lived reality. Her recommendation would likely determine the children's future, and both options carried significant risks. If she supported Marcus's petition, she'd be gambling two children's stability on an addict's promise of sustained recovery. If she opposed it, she'd be setting a precedent that addiction could permanently terminate parental rights, potentially discouraging other parents from seeking help. The weight of this decision pressed against her chest as she finally started her car and drove home through empty streets, knowing that tomorrow would bring no easy answers. The Manhattan family court buzzed with anticipation as reporters clustered outside, drawn by the unusual story of a billionaire, two orphaned twins, and a father returned from the dead. Inside courtroom 3B, the future of Stella and Luna Rodriguez would be decided by 12 strangers and one overworked judge. Alexander sat with his legal team, three of New York's most expensive family law attorneys, while across the aisle Marcus fidgeted in an ill-fitting suit beside lawyers he clearly couldn't afford. The disparity was obvious and uncomfortable, exactly what Richard Blackwood had calculated when he'd orchestrated this confrontation. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order with the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. She reviewed the case summary with meticulous attention, occasionally glancing at the twins, who sat in the gallery between Victoria and their court-appointed guardian ad litem. "This case presents complex questions about parental rights, child welfare, and the definition of family in contemporary society," Judge Morrison began. "The court's paramount concern is determining what arrangement serves the best interests of Stella and Luna Rodriguez." Marcus's attorney, James Crawford, presented their case first. Crawford was younger than Alexander's legal team, but hungrier, armed with passionate arguments about redemption and second chances. He painted Marcus as a devoted father, destroyed by grief, who'd conquered his demons and deserved the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his daughters. "Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez lost his way during the darkest period of his life. The death of his beloved wife Isabel, combined with mounting medical bills and job loss, created a perfect storm that would challenge any parent. Addiction is a recognized medical condition, not a moral failing, and my client has successfully completed treatment." Crawford presented evidence of Marcus's transformation, completion certificates from rehabilitation programs, employment records from his construction job, testimonials from his AA sponsor and therapist, and documentation of stable housing in a family-friendly neighborhood in Philadelphia. Alexander's attorney, Margaret Walsh, countered with a devastating recitation of the children's experience following their abandonment. She presented testimony from teachers about the twins' initial behavioral problems, medical records documenting malnutrition and signs of neglect, and psychological evaluations revealing trauma consistent with prolonged stress and fear. "Mr. Rodriguez may have conquered his addiction, but he cannot undo the damage caused by his choices," Walsh argued. "These children spent 3 days alone on Manhattan streets begging strangers for food because their father prioritized his addiction over their survival. Mr. Blackwood didn't just provide temporary shelter, he's given them a stable, loving home where they've flourished, academically, emotionally, and socially." Walsh presented her own evidence, report cards showing dramatic improvement in grades, psychological evaluations documenting remarkable recovery from trauma symptoms, and testimony from the twins' current teachers, doctors, and coaches about their thriving development. The most compelling evidence came from video recordings of the twins in their current home environment, laughing during board games, confidently presenting school projects, sleeping peacefully through the night, without the terror-induced insomnia that had plagued them initially. As afternoon dissolved into evening, both sides rested their cases. The judge announced that she would interview the children privately, before rendering her decision, setting the stage for the most important conversation Stella and Luna would ever have. Outside the courthouse, media crews captured Marcus breaking down in tears, while Alexander maintained stoic composure, neither man knowing that two 8-year-old girls held their fates in small, determined hands. While the custody battle dominated headlines, Richard Blackwood was executing the final phase of his corporate coup from his private office in the Blackwood Industries Tower. The board meeting he'd called for the following morning would determine not just Alexander's custody of 2 children, but control of a $12 billion empire. Richard had spent weeks carefully seeding doubt among key shareholders and board members. Every missed meeting, every declined acquisition, every decision Alexander had made to prioritize his new family became ammunition in Richard's calculated assault on his nephew's leadership. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard addressed the emergency board session, his voice carrying the gravity of a funeral director, "we face an unprecedented crisis of leadership that threatens the very foundation of this company." The conference room was packed with the 18 members of Blackwood Industries' board of directors, titans of industry who'd built their reputations on ruthless decision-making and unwavering focus on shareholder value. Richard had their complete attention. In the past 4 months, Alexander has cost this company over $20 billion in lost opportunities. The Yamamoto deal, the European expansion, the telecommunications merger, all abandoned or postponed because our CEO has become distracted by personal matters. Board member Thomas Chen raised his hand. "Richard, we understand Alexander is going through an adoption process. Surely the board supports family." "This isn't about family," Richard interrupted. "This is about a man who's lost his capacity for rational judgment." Alexander walked out of the most important meeting in company history to have breakfast with 2 children he'd known for 20 minutes. "He's restructured our entire compensation model to accommodate work-life balance policies that reduce productivity. He's donated company resources to charitable causes without board approval." Richard clicked a remote and the wall screen displayed a series of financial charts, showing declining stock performance, missed revenue targets, and competitor gains in key markets. "Our stock prices dropped 15% while our primary competitors have gained market share we've held for decades. Major investors are openly questioning Alexander's fitness to lead. The business press is speculating about a hostile takeover." The room buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Richard had chosen his timing perfectly. These numbers couldn't be disputed, and the board members' fiduciary duty to shareholders superseded any personal loyalty to Alexander. But Richard's true masterpiece was yet to come. "However, the financial concerns pale in comparison to the reputational damage we're facing," Richard continued. "Our CEO is currently in court fighting a biological father for custody of 2 children. The media narrative portrays Alexander as either a saint or a manipulator, depending on which outlet you read. Either way, Blackwood Industries has become tabloid fodder." Board member Elizabeth Warren leaned forward. "Are you suggesting Alexander's personal life disqualifies him from leadership?" Richard smiled coldly. "I'm suggesting that when a CEO's personal decisions consistently harm shareholder value, the board has an obligation to act. Furthermore, I have evidence that Alexander's involvement with these children wasn't the spontaneous act of charity it's been portrayed as." The room fell silent as Richard displayed a series of documents his private investigator had compiled. Alexander knew these children's mother 3 years ago. Isabel Rodriguez contacted his office seeking employment after her husband's job loss. Alexander's assistant rejected her request, but not before documenting the family's financial desperation. When Alexander encountered her children months later, he knew exactly who they were. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Richard was suggesting that Alexander's adoption wasn't motivated by compassion but by guilt, and that he'd hidden this connection from the courts and the media. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a CEO who's compromised his judgment, damaged our market position, and potentially engaged in legal deception. The board must act decisively to protect this company and our shareholders." Richard had orchestrated the perfect trap. Win or lose the custody battle, Alexander's reputation would be destroyed, leaving the board no choice but to remove him and elevate Richard to the position he'd coveted for decades. What Richard hadn't anticipated was that some traps catch the wrong prey, and that two 8-year-old girls possessed more wisdom than a room full of corporate executives. Judge Martha Chen had presided over hundreds of custody cases, but nothing had prepared her for the profound clarity of two 6-year-old girls who spoke about family with the wisdom of ancient souls. In her private chambers, away from lawyers and reporters, Stella sat with perfect posture while Luna fidgeted with the hem of her blue dress. The weight of their decision would reshape 3 lives forever. "Tell me what family means to you," Judge Chen said gently. Stella looked directly into the judge's eyes. "Family means someone shows up when you're scared. When Luna had nightmares about Daddy leaving us again, Mr. Alexander sat by our bed until morning. He sang the same lullaby Mama used to sing." Luna nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Real daddies don't leave their children on streets asking strangers for food. Mr. Alexander teaches us math and lets us paint his fingernails purple." The judge leaned forward. "What about your biological father?" "He says he's changed." The twins exchanged one of their silent conversations, a language developed through survival. "Marcus is trying to be better," Stella said carefully, "but trying and doing are different things. Mr. Alexander doesn't just try to love us, he does it every single day." Judge Chen felt her throat tighten. "Do you want to see Marcus sometimes?" "Maybe," Luna said, "if he promises to never leave us alone again. But we want to live with our real daddy." "Marcus is your biological father," the judge reminded them. Stella's response cut through the legal complexity with startling simplicity. "Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Mr. Alexander chose us when nobody else wanted us. That makes him our real daddy." The judge had heard similar statements from other children, but never delivered with such unwavering conviction. These girls had experienced abandonment, witnessed their mother's death, and survived on their own. Yet they spoke without bitterness or anger. "If I allow you to stay with Mr. Alexander, what would you want to tell other children in similar situations?" Luna smiled for the first time during the interview. That families can be made, not just born. And that angels sometimes wear expensive suits and carry briefcases. Stella added, "And that trading your shoes for love is always worth it." Judge Chen knew her decision would face scrutiny from child welfare advocates, legal scholars, and the media. But in 30 years on the bench, she had learned to trust one thing above all else: the voices of the children whose futures hung in the balance. These girls had already chosen their family. Now she had to decide whether the law would honor that choice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Chen returned to the bench. Alexander felt his heart hammering against his ribs, while Marcus Rodriguez sat hunched forward, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Victoria held her breath in the gallery, knowing this moment would define everything. "Have your careful consideration of all testimony and evidence," Judge Chen began. "I must address the fundamental question: what serves the best interests of Stella and Luna Rodriguez?" The twins sat motionless in the front row, their small hands intertwined. "Mr. Rodriguez, your addiction led to neglect and abandonment that caused documented psychological trauma to your daughters. While I acknowledge your recent efforts at recovery, parental rights carry permanent responsibilities that cannot be suspended during personal crises." Marcus's shoulders began to shake. "Therefore, I hereby terminate your parental rights and grant full custody to Mr. Alexander Blackwood, contingent upon completion of standard adoption procedures." Alexander felt the floor shift beneath him. After months of uncertainty, Stella and Luna were truly his daughters. But Judge Chen wasn't finished. "However, I'm also ordering supervised monthly visits between Mr. Rodriguez and the children, should they desire contact. These girls have already demonstrated remarkable wisdom in understanding that relationships exist on many levels." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically while photographers captured Alexander embracing his new daughters. Marcus wept openly, but nodded his acceptance of the decision. "Daddy Alex," Stella whispered. "Does this mean we're really your family now?" "Forever and always," Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. In the back of the courtroom, Richard Blackwood stood abruptly and walked out. His plan had backfired spectacularly. Not only had Alexander kept the children, but news of Richard's manipulation had already leaked to financial journalists. Victoria approached the newly formed family with tears streaming down her face. "Congratulations," she said softly. As they left the courthouse, photographers captured an image that would appear on front pages across the country. A billionaire businessman, walking hand in hand with two little girls, all three wearing matching grins of pure joy. The Yamamoto deal had cost Alexander millions. The legal battles had consumed months of his life. The media scrutiny had been brutal. But watching Stella and Luna skip down the courthouse steps, chattering excitedly about their new last name, Alexander knew he had made the most profitable trade of his career. Some investments, he realized, couldn't be measured in dollars. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, the Blackwood household had settled into rhythms that would have seemed impossible during Alexander's bachelor days. Gone were the 18-hour workdays and impromptu international business trips. In their place, homework help, piano recitals, and elaborate tea parties where a Fortune 500 CEO regularly wore plastic tiaras. The transformation extended far beyond Alexander's personal life. His assistant, Margaret, had become an unofficial grandmother to the twins, keeping emergency snacks in her desk drawer and scheduling business calls around school pickups. The executive boardroom now displayed crayon artwork alongside quarterly reports. "Mr. Blackwood," Stella announced during a video conference with Tokyo investors, "Luna lost her tooth and the tooth fairy needs to visit tonight." Without missing a beat, Alexander muted his microphone. "Tell the tooth fairy I'll leave her payment in the usual spot," he whispered back. As Japanese executives, visible on screen, smiled approvingly, family values, they noted, indicated strong character and long-term thinking. Richard Blackwood's disgrace had sent shockwaves through corporate circles. His removal from the board and subsequent investigation into his business practices became a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting profit above principles. Meanwhile, Blackwood Industries' stock reached record highs as investors embraced the company's new focus on ethical leadership. Marcus Rodriguez kept his monthly appointments religiously. The supervised visits took place at a community center, with Victoria monitoring interactions between the girls and their biological father. Progress was slow, but genuine. Marcus had completed addiction treatment and was working construction while attending counseling sessions. "He's different now," Luna observed after one visit. "Sadder, but more real." Stella, ever the protector, remained cautious but fair. "People can change if they really want to. Marcus wants to. But wanting and doing are still different things." The girls had started therapy sessions that amazed their counselor, Dr. Patricia Williams. Despite their traumatic experiences, both children showed remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence. "They've learned to separate love from obligation," Dr. Williams explained to Alexander during a parent consultation. "They understand that Marcus loves them, but wasn't capable of caring for them properly. It's a distinction many adults struggle to make." Alexander's own therapy sessions focused on his transformation from workaholic to present father. The process forced him to confront years of using business success to avoid emotional intimacy. "I spent my whole life building walls," he told Victoria during one of their evening walks through Central Park. Stella and Luna didn't tear them down. They simply walked through them as if the walls didn't exist. Victoria had watched the evolution with professional fascination and personal joy. The man she'd once accused of caring more about quarterly reports than human feelings now read bedtime stories with different voices for each character and could braid hair with surprising skill. The family that had formed through crisis was becoming stronger through choice. 2 years after that rain-soaked morning when two little girls offered their shoes for bread, Alexander stood before Blackwood Industries' board of directors, presenting results that redefined corporate success. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, gesturing to charts displaying record-breaking numbers. "This year we achieved $15 billion in revenue while simultaneously launching the most comprehensive employee wellness program in our industry." In the front row, 8-year-old Stella and Luna sat in matching child-sized business suits, notebooks open, pretending to take important notes. They'd insisted on attending after Alexander explained that running a company meant making decisions that affected thousands of families. "The Isabella Rodriguez Memorial Foundation," Alexander continued, "has prevented 847 families from losing their homes due to medical emergencies. Our employee retention rate increased by 60%, after implementing flexible work arrangements, and productivity rose by 25%. Board member Elizabeth Harrison raised her hand. Mr. Blackwood, some shareholders initially worried that your focus on family values would harm profitability. How do you respond to those concerns? Alexander smiled, glancing at his daughters. I respond with results. Our stock price has increased 340% since we began prioritizing human welfare alongside financial performance. Turns out, taking care of people is excellent business. Stella raised her small hand. Daddy Alex, can I say something? Alexander nodded, amused by her formal tone. Standing on her chair to address the board, Stella spoke with the confidence of someone twice her age. My sister and I learned that when grown-ups take care of each other, everybody wins. Mr. Alexander takes care of us, so we help him by being good and studying hard. He takes care of his workers, so they help him by working hard. It's like a big family, Luna added. And families share everything, the good stuff and the hard stuff. The board members exchanged impressed glances. These children were articulating business philosophy with startling clarity. Alexander's presentation continued with details about the company's groundbreaking mentorship program connecting employees with at-risk youth, and the scholarship fund that had already sent 200 underprivileged students to college. We've proved that compassionate capitalism isn't just possible, it's profitable, he concluded. Our success isn't measured only in revenue, but in lives improved and communities strengthened. After the meeting, as the family walked through Manhattan's financial district, Luna asked, Daddy Alex, do you miss your old life, when you only cared about money? Alexander stopped walking, considering the question seriously. You know what I miss most about my old life? Both girls looked up expectantly. Absolutely nothing, he said, scooping them both into a hug. My old life was empty. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered. Stella giggled. We're better than money? You're better than anything money could ever buy, Alexander replied. You taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. They can only be earned, through love. As they headed home to their evening routine of homework, dinner, and bedtime stories, Alexander reflected on how completely his definition of wealth had changed. True prosperity, he now understood, was measured in laughter, trust, and the peaceful sleep of children who knew they were loved unconditionally. 5 years after two little girls changed the trajectory of a billionaire's life, the Blackwood family gathered for their weekly tradition, Sunday dinner in the apartment overlooking Central Park, where their story began. 13-year-old Stella had inherited her adoptive father's business acumen and her late mother's compassionate heart. Her nonprofit organization, Soul Hope, had collected over 10,000 pairs of shoes for homeless children across the country. The girl who once offered her own shoes for food now ensured other children never faced that impossible choice. Luna, equally driven but with different talents, had developed an app called Family Lifeline that connected families in crisis with local resources, preventing the kind of tragedy that had separated her family years earlier. At 13, she was already being courted by tech companies impressed by her innovative approach to social problems. Alexander, now 42 and married to Victoria Chen Blackwood, had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on the foundation work that had become his true passion. Blackwood Industries continued thriving under new leadership that prioritized both profit and purpose. The most surprising development was Marcus Rodriguez's transformation. 5 years sober and working as a counselor for men struggling with addiction, he joined the family for dinner once monthly. The relationship remained complex, but it was built on honesty and mutual respect. Remember when you two were afraid I'd leave you like other adults had? Alexander asked during dessert. Stella laughed. We were babies then. Now we know, you're stuck with us forever. Even when I'm old and grumpy and can't remember where I put my keys, Alexander said. Especially then, Luna replied. That's when you'll need us most. Victoria watched the exchange with wonder. The man she'd once accused of caring more about stock prices than human feelings now showed more emotional intelligence than most trained therapists. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. Girls, I want you to know that watching you grow up into such incredible young women has been the greatest gift of my recovery. Alexander, I can never thank you enough for giving them the father they deserved. Alexander met Marcus's eyes with understanding. They saved all of us, Marcus. We just had to be brave enough to let them. As evening settled over Manhattan, The unlikely family cleaned dishes together, helped with homework, and prepared for another week of the ordinary miracles that defined their extraordinary life. The little girls who had once traded their shoes for survival now walked confidently toward futures filled with possibility, carrying their mother's memory and their father's values into a world they were already beginning to change. Love, Alexander had learned, was the only investment that guaranteed infinite returns.